Okay, test number 3. Test number 3 was including question of section B of paper 1, that is international economics. And growth and development. Questions are mainly related to theories of trade. Within international, mainly it is theories of trade, and among theories of trade it include old as well as new. So first test was basically on international economics, including all old theories. So there are questions on Ricardian model, questions on HO model, standard trade model, then a specific factor model, and among new trade theories it is economies of scale, inter-industry trade, intra-industry trade. So there are questions related to the theories of trade in the international economics section. And in the growth and development, the initial theories of development. Initial theories of development, in the sense most of the question related to Solow model, then Harrod's model, balanced and unbalanced growth, balanced versus unbalanced. So the topic basically include international and growth and development. Now start with the question number 1. First section, compulsory question. Now this first question was basically of the year 2016. Differentiate between inter-industry and intra-industry trade. Can standard HO model explain intra-industry trade? So you have to differentiate between inter-industry and intra-industry trade, and can standard HO model explain intra-industry trade? First of all, ये लिख लीजिएगा, this was the question asked in 2016. Now, what to write in this question? Inter-industry and intra-industry trade. You can simply say that new trade theory is based upon the assumption of economies of scale and imperfect market structure. It is basically a part of new trade theories. New trade theory is based upon the assumption of economies of scale and imperfect form of market, that is monopolistic in nature. But monopolistic firm produces differentiated product and they are not producing the homogeneous product. So since product are differentiated, it means if home country is producing cloth and in the cloth industry there are 10 firm, then all those 10 firm are not producing the same cloth. They are producing different variety of cloth. So it is now possible that home country is exporting cloth and home country is also importing cloth, but it is not same cloth. So trade of or exchange of cloth for cloth is, cloth for cloth will be referred as intra-industry trade. And if home country is exporting cloth and in exchange buying food or importing food, then it will be referred as inter-industry trade. So inter-industry trade was part of old trade theories. In the old trade theories, which was based on the assumption of perfect competition, firms producing homogeneous product. So if one country has comparative advantage in cloth, then the other country was having comparative advantage in food. So if home country was exporting cloth, it was importing food in exchange. So trade of cloth for food or food for cloth is inter-industry, and trade of cloth for cloth or food for food is intra-industry trade. Now after making that differentiation, you have to highlight certain point as well. Like for example, why inter-industry trade arises and why intra-industry trade arises. So why inter-industry trade arises? Inter-industry trade arises mainly because of comparative advantage. If one country has comparative advantage in producing cloth, then that country will be exporting that cloth. So inter-industry trade is arising because of comparative advantage. And why intra-industry trade arises? Intra-industry trade is arising mainly because of difference in consumer preference. It is mainly arising because we prefer to buy foreign cloth. Now if we prefer to buy foreign cloth, not because foreign cloth is cheaper, but it is my preference. So intra-industry trade is arising mainly because of difference in preference. So that is basically one difference. Now since inter-industry trade is based upon comparative advantage, cost is something that can be calculated. So the pattern of trade, the pattern of inter-industry trade is predictable. You can say which country will export which product. Obviously a country will export that product in which it has comparative cost advantage. So that can be measured. So the pattern of inter-industry trade is predictable. But why intra-industry trade arises? Because of difference in preference, and consumers' preference we can't predict. So the pattern of intra-industry trade is unpredictable. Which country will export which cloth we cannot say. So the pattern of trade in the inter-industry trade was predictable, but pattern of trade in the intra-industry trade was unpredictable. Then further important, if you have to explain further, although scope वहाँ कम होता है उतना ज़्यादा time नहीं available है, but still if you have to add one more point, then we can say that between two countries, if two countries are very similar in terms of their endowment, which means capital labor ratio in both countries are approximately same. So if capital labor ratio will be same, then which form of trade will be prominent? If two countries are very similar in nature, so if two countries are very similar in nature, then intra-industry trade will be more prominent. And if two countries are very dissimilar in terms of their endowment, then inter-industry trade will be more prominent. So there, first of all, explain what do you mean by inter-industry, intra-industry. Why we are talking about that? Because it is part of new trade theories, and in that new trade theories the market is monopolistic in nature, firm produces differentiated product, and therefore we are discussing about intra-industry trade. Then highlight certain points और एक पैराग्राफ उसमें फर्दर ऐड करना है कि कैन एचओ मॉडल एक्सप्लेन इंट्रा इंडस्ट्री ट्रेड. सो कैन एचओ मॉडल एक्सप्लेन इंट्रा इंडस्ट्री ट्रेड? एचओ मॉडल इज पार्ट ऑफ विच theory? Old theory. Old theories are based upon perfect competition. In perfect competition, firm produces homogeneous good, but for homogeneous good there is no possibility of intra-industry trade. There is possibility of only inter-industry trade. So HO model explain only inter-industry trade. HO model does not explain intra-industry trade, because HO model is based upon perfect competition assumption, firms producing identical product. So in that 150 word basically you have to make sure that ये सारे points included होंगे. ठीक है? That is given. How to write, how much to write, वो model answer में exactly लिखा हुआ है. ठीक है? So just follow that. Remember, in this type of question, if you are more accurate, तो even you can get 7 out of 10. 70% भी स्कोर कर सकते हो. Normally वो 5.5 या 6 के आसपास ही नंबर होते हैं, but in such question where you know the basic point of differences, you know the second part of it as well, so in those questions you can expect 7, provided you exactly differentiate between inter-industry, intra-industry and highlight their significance as well. ठीक है? Then move to the second question. It says international factor mobility and free trade can substitute for each other. International factor mobility and free trade can substitute for each other. So if there is a free trade, it is substituting for labor mobility or capital mobility. So international factor mobility and free trade can substitute for each other. What does it exactly trying to explain? International factor mobility is free and free trade can substitute for each other. That means the same outcome you will achieve if you allow factor mobility or if you allow mobility of goods. Now to explain that, you can make use of that HO model. HO model assumes that normally when you explain any trade, whether it is old or new, basically trade means here from home country to foreign country there will be flow of goods. There will be flow of goods between home country and foreign country. That means factor of production are not moving from one country to the other country. Factors of production are freely mobile within one country. Within one country, labor can move from cloth to food or food to cloth, but labor cannot move from home country to the other country. So there is basically trade of goods. You are exporting goods, in exchange you are importing goods. So there is trade of goods, but there is no mobility of factor of production. But the outcome is same. It means that if you export, suppose if I say home country is abundant in labor and cloth is labor intensive. Home country is abundant in labor and cloth is labor intensive. So obviously home country will have comparative cost advantage in producing cloth. So home country will be exporting cloth. As home country will be exporting cloth, in exchange home country will import food. So what home country makes sure that it allow the foreign country to use the benefit of its abundant factor. Home country is not selling labor, but home country is selling what? Goods produced with labor intensive technology. In that way, indirectly, the factor of production also moves. Directly only goods will flow, but which good is flowing? Labor intensive good is flowing. So indirectly labor is also flowing, because ultimately if labor will also flow, then labor will also produce good in that commodity. So rather than flow of goods, it is basically flow of, rather than basically the flow of factor, it is basically flow of goods. Now to some extent you can also say that the outcome is very similar, in the sense if there is flow of goods from home country to foreign country. So if home country export cloth and from foreign country import food, then in that process obviously if home country is exporting cloth, it means price of cloth in foreign country must have been higher, and price in home country of cloth, that is PC by PF in home and PC by PF in foreign, ये relationship रहा होगा. So when home country export cloth to the foreign country, supply of that good available in home country get reduced. So price in home country will start rising, and price in the foreign country will start declining. But at the same time, as price will change, there will be change in the factor price ratio as well. This PC by PF determines W by R in home country and W by R in the foreign country. So we can say that before trade this was the relation. Now if PC by PF increases in home country, what happens in home country? Remember, whenever you draw any production possibility frontier, production point is determined by point of tangency, and slope of such line will be PC by PF. Here you are marking cloth and food. As PC upon PF increases, this line gets steeper. So tangency will be to the right now, which means country produces more cloth. But how to produce more cloth? To produce more of cloth, you require more of which factor? Labor. So demand for labor will increase more. So wage will increase more. relative to rent. So this W by R will also increase, and here W by R will fall. So although there is trade of goods, so prices of goods are equalized, but at the same time, even when factors are not mobile, the prices of factors are also equalized. It is nothing but factor price equalization here. Factor price equalization, mainly you have to explain that mechanism, that when home country is not allowing labor to move from home country to foreign country, rather than allowing labor to move from home country to foreign country, home country is allowing foreign country to use or buy that good which is produced by labor intensive technology. In that way labor moves indirectly. So the outcome in that way is same, whether you allow mobility of goods or whether you allow mobility of factor of production. ठीक है, इंटरनेशनल वाले क्वेश्चन पर within international, question number D. Contrast export bias growth as against import bias growth with the help of diagram. Under what condition could growth be immense rising? ठीक है, again ये most frequently asked question. Contrast export bias growth and import bias growth, and in what condition growth could be immense rising growth. First of all, there are we can say three parts to be answered. What do you mean by export bias growth? What do you mean by import bias growth? And in what condition growth could be immense rising? In what condition it will be immense rising? So when you say export bias growth, it means what? Growth, the nature of growth is towards, but what does that mean? If I say export bias growth is happening, so it means what?
Factors of production.
Factors of production used intensively in export sector is increasing. Either factor of production is increasing or productivity of that factor is increasing. Growth could be in the form of technical change. Growth could be in the form of a resource change. But if technological change occurs in such a way that it increases productivity of that factor more, which is used in export sector, then it will be referred as export bias growth. And if technological change increases productivity of that factor more, which is used intensively in the import sector, then it is import bias growth. So first of all, you have to be clear between export and import bias growth, and then you can give this common example. If cloth is labor intensive and a technological change occurs which increases productivity of labor more, then it is cloth bias growth. It is biased towards that sector. If food is land intensive and technological change increases productivity of land more, then it is food biased growth. But what will be the effect of bias growth on production possibility frontier? What will be the effect of bias growth on production possibility frontier? So when you say export bias growth, if cloth is export good and food is import good. If earlier there was a production possibility frontier based upon a given particular price ratio, economy was producing a certain combination of cloth and food. So now tell me, if there is export bias growth, then what will be the outcome? In the case of export bias growth, this PPF will shift, and it will shift more in the direction of cloth, more in the direction of cloth and less in the direction of food, in this way. Which means at same price ratio, now country will be producing more of cloth and less of food. More of cloth and less of food. Now, if export bias growth occurs, what is the impact on relative supply, relative demand? If you draw RS and RD curve, their intersection determine price ratio, PC by PF. And here you write QC plus QC star upon QF plus QF star. That is world relative quantity. So when a specific price ratio has been determined, remember, if I say export bias growth occurs, so it is in the nature of cloth bias, so it shifts more in the direction of cloth. So at the same price ratio, country produces more of cloth. But if you produce more of cloth and less of food, then what will be the impact on this total value? More of cloth, it increases. Less of food, it decreases. So entire value will increase, which means relative supply curve will shift to the right. As it shifts to the right, what is the effect on PC by PF? PC by PF get reduced. And remember that PC upon PF is nothing but terms of trade for home country, because we are assuming that home country is labor abundant and cloth is labor intensive. So due to export bias growth, terms of trade for home country will deteriorate, and because TOT is deteriorating, therefore we can say that due to that factor, home country will be worse off. Now remember, it is export bias growth. We say it is export bias growth. So when there is a growth, whether it is export bias or whether it is import bias, but there is growth, resource has increased, productivity has increased. So due to growth, there will always be some positive effect on the economy. It will generate more employment. Resources are increasing, so it will be having some positive effect. But at the same time, since growth is in the export sector, the commodity that you export, now you are producing more of that good. So due to more production of that good, what will be the effect on price of that good? If you produce more of a commodity, then what is the effect on price of that good? It will reduce. But you are exporter of that good and price of that good has reduced. So is it advantageous to you? That is it favorable for you or unfavorable for you? Terms of trade becomes unfavorable because price of export good is declining. So due to that unfavorable terms of trade, there will be negative effect. So negative effect is because of unfavorable TOT, and positive effect is due to increase in resource. Now if this negative effect is more than positive effect, then entire effect is negative, and such growth will be referred as immobilizing growth. So when we have a immobilizing growth, we have immobilizing growth when the negative effect of TOT is greater than the positive effect of growth. The term used by Jagdish Bhagwati said that in the developing countries generally the nature of growth is that the developing country try to promote their export. So they indulge into those policies which promote growth in the export sector. But if those policies promote growth in the export sector, then supply of that good increases. But because of more supply of that good, price of that good in the international market reduces, which is unfavorable. So due to that, the reduction of TOT, the welfare is declining. But remember, decline of TOT has to be very high. Only then this negative effect will be greater than the positive effect. So when immobilizing growth can arise, ये negative ज़्यादा होना चाहिए, but negative is due to the reduction of TOT. So if TOT is declining more, then that negative effect will be more. But when this TOT will decline more?
Inelastic.
ये जो relative supply relative demand, it has to be elastic or inelastic. Remember, when you say elastic, it means there will be more change in quantity, and when you say inelastic, there is more change in price. So we have to discuss about change in price. So if price reduces more, then we have greater TOT impact. So for immeasurizing growth, relative supply and relative demand must be very steep. That is, its elasticity must be very less. Steep होना चाहिए, RS as well as RD. So export bias, generally in the case of export bias growth, you use the word immeasurizing growth, not for the import bias growth. In the case of import bias growth, what will happen? In that answer, this will become one part. Parallel diagram और draw करेंगे. For import bias growth, in the case of import bias growth, it will shift more in the direction of food. So when it will shift more in the direction of food, quantity of food will increase and cloth will reduce. But if denominator increases more, then entire value will reduce and RS will shift to the left, and therefore TOT will improve. So growth will be having positive effect, TOT also having positive effect. So immeasurizing growth arises only in which case? Export bias. So in that first compulsory question, there were 3 questions from international trade and 2 questions from growth and development. In that first question, first compulsory question, 3 from international trade and 2 from growth. Now first do all international trade questions. In section B, first question, that is question number 5 compulsory. Read those questions. The first is, HO theory does not invalidate the classical theory, but rather powerfully supplements it. Substantiate the statement. HO theory does not invalidate, it does not refute classical theory of comparative cost advantage, but rather supplement it powerfully. So how it supplemented and why it is not invalidating the classical theory. Now while explaining those such type of question, just in that first paragraph you must explain comparative cost advantage and HO model. So according to the comparative cost advantage theory, a country will have comparative advantage in that line of production in which statement क्या होगा? A country will have comparative advantage in that line of production in which opportunity cost of production is lower in that country as compared to the other country. So comparative cost advantage of cloth will lie with home country provided for home country opportunity cost of cloth is less as compared to opportunity cost in the foreign country. And how you calculate that opportunity cost, वो उस क्वेश्चन में रिक्वायर्ड नहीं है, but simply that first line has to be very specific, that as per the comparative cost advantage theory, our economy will have comparative advantage in that line of production in which it has, for which its opportunity cost is lower in that country as compared to the other country. And what is the basic statement of HO model? HO model simply say that trade arises because of difference in endowment of resource. A labor abundant country will specialize in labor intensive goods and a capital abundant country will specialize in, but why? Why labor abundant country will specialize in labor intensive goods? Reason, if labor is abundant and you are using labor intensively, then cost of producing that good will be lower. Because of that abundance, that factor will be cheaper. So cost of production is determined by the factor prices. So in the first paragraph just explain that. Now from then onwards you can directly explain that in the Ricardian model comparative costs between two countries were different because of difference in labor productivity. But why labor productivity is different between two countries? Not explained by the model. A Ricardian model does not explain what? A Ricardian model does not explain why opportunity cost between India and US is different. It simply says there is difference in comparative cost. But why it is different, not explained. And which theory explain it? HO theory explain that. In what sense it explain it? It say that since labor is abundant in India, therefore if you produce labor intensive good, then its cost will be less in India because labor is abundant. So it gives some logic, reason for it. HO model is not refuting the Ricardian model. In what sense? HO model also talks about comparative cost advantage, but in HO model it explains why comparative cost advantage is different between different countries because of difference in resources. But in the Ricardian model it was just based upon the fact that comparative costs are different because of difference in productivity of labor. Just for example, if you have to explain it further, then remember in a Ricardian model, in that Ricardian model it is 2 by 2 by 1 model. So we have only one factor of production. Two countries producing two goods by using only one factor of production. And in the Ricardian model you have production possibility frontier, which is straight line, PPF, and on axis you plot cloth and food. And how to calculate opportunity cost? Opportunity cost of cloth. Opportunity cost of cloth is nothing but slope of this line. Opportunity cost of this cloth is nothing but slope of this line. If I give just one example, if I say that a unit labor requirement for cloth is 4 hours, it takes 4 hours to produce 1 unit of cloth, and unit labor to produce food is 6 hours, it takes 6 hours to produce 1 unit of food, then what is opportunity cost of cloth? Opportunity cost of cloth means simply if you produce 1 more unit of cloth, how many unit of food that has to be given up. So to produce 1 unit of cloth you require how much time? In that 4 hours, how many unit of food could have been produced? 2 by 3. So basically opportunity cost becomes ALC by ALF, 2 by 3, 4 by 6. So opportunity cost of cloth is nothing but ALC upon ALF. But does this model explain why it takes 4 hours here? Does this model explain why in the foreign country, for foreign country star mark here, if I say it takes 5 hours here? So this model is not explaining anywhere why it is taking more time in the foreign country and less time in the home country. It simply says that productivity is different. So when productivity is different, there will be different opportunity cost. So in foreign country, if the values are different, you will have a different opportunity cost. So if it is 2 by 3 here, and if I say here this is 6 hours, so it will be 5 by 6. So opportunity cost will be different here, and the country will have comparative advantage in that line of production for which opportunity cost is lower in that country. So Ricardian model is not explaining why costs are different, and HO model explain that as it is based upon 2 by 2 by 2 model. So there are 2 factor of production. So when there are 2 factor of production, the production possibility curve will become concave to origin. Production possibility curve becomes concave to that origin. So in the HO model we explain that the cost is different because economies are endowed with different resources. So if one country is having abundant labor, then labor intensive good will be produced more cheaply in that country because wages will be lower in that country. So in that model, HO model is just supporting the Ricardian model. In fact, when you explain any old theory, what do you find common in all old theories of trade? Trade arises because of difference in cost. Comparative cost different है तभी तो trade हो रहा है. And cost is determining the price. That means prices are different without trade. So if prices are different without trade, there will be trade. If prices in China and prices in India will be same without trade, then there is no point in exchanging. We exchange goods because there are difference in prices, and difference in prices because difference in cost. So difference in cost is the main reason. ये लास्ट ईयर के पेपर में भी एक क्वेश्चन था जनरल फॉर्म में, ये 7th C पढ़ लीजिएगा. 7th C will have same idea. In every theory of international trade, the principle of comparative advantage is reflected. So in every theory of international trade, principle of comparative advantage is reflected. So in every theory means, give some example. Ricardian model, HO model, in any other model. So comparative cost advantage is the main reason behind international trade in most of the theories. Same argument was basically followed by, if you go with this 5th E, explain with the help of diagram how Habermas theory of opportunity cost is an improvement over comparative cost theory of Ricardo. So Ricardo और Habermas में difference है कि Ricardo consider that opportunity cost is same, constant. So line will be straight, and in Habermas it is concave to origin, representing increasing opportunity cost. When you consider only one factor, it simply means that what is the cost of producing that good? The cost of producing that good will be only in terms of labor. So whatever be the cost of labor, that will determine the value of that product. If I am producing cloth by using only labor, then what is the value of that cloth? Since it is perfect competition, so value here it will be represented as price. So under perfect competition, price must be equal to cost, but cost depends upon factor of production. So which factor you are using? Labor only. So whatever be the labor value, that will be the value of good also, because labor value will determine the cost, labor cost, and labor cost is the only cost, and that will determine the entire value of the product. So in the Ricardian model, it was based upon the labor theory of value, but Habermas theory does not assume that it is necessary that we have only a labor theory of value. That means it is not necessary that labor is the only factor of production. Now there was a straight question in this. This was also in 2016. Compulsory question में था वो अभी. I write a short note on gravity model of trade. It is given in introductory chapter. Krugman में भी given है as well as in the Salvatore. In Krugman it is given in terms of equation. So you explain that gravity model, just give the idea that trade between two countries. So if there is one country and the other country, country I, country J, trade between two countries depends on size of their GDP, that is mass, and distance between these two countries. So it simply say that the value of trade between country I and country J, value of trade, is equal to, A is a constant term, GDP of country G and GDP of country I upon distance between country G and country I. So greater will be the size of GDP, greater will be the value of trade. Greater will be the distance, less will be the trade. Further, it has been modified to be written as YJ या YI upon, there are certain parameters attached to that. It is not necessarily according to that relationship, but there are certain parameters attached to that. And then give some significance. Significance means give some logic or example. Why countries form economic union, a regional bloc. So if you have any regional bloc, then what is the idea of having that regional bloc? In that region, due to greater proximity, transportation costs will be lower and therefore there will be more trade. So a regional bloc यूरोपियन यूनियन का एग्जांपल हो गया, किसी अदर एग्जांपल के फॉर्म में आप कंसीडर कर सकते हैं. So just if you write any such concept, relate it with the environment. So gravity model simply say that two important point. Value of trade between two countries depends upon two factors. One, the size of those countries, which is determined by their GDP, and second, the distance between these two countries. Greater will be the distance, less will be the trade. Greater will be the size, more will be the trade. So the trade volume between US and China is more because their size is more. Trade between US and China is more because of the size of the economy. So it is basically because of the size of the economy. Now if I say trade between US and Mexico, so it could be due to greater proximity. But after explaining that, give some drawback side as well, limitation part as well. So what is the limitation? Trade also depends upon other factor other than GDP and distance. Distance between India and Pakistan is less, but value of trade is less. So gravity model is focusing on the GDP and the distance, ignoring the other aspects. So you have to for writing such answer 150 words में meaning part of it, make that concept more significant, implication part of it, and if there are drawbacks, some explain that drawback part. Question number 5 का B पढ़ लिया. Show the likely impact of growth on economy's offer curve. Impact of growth on economy's offer curve explain करना. Again an important part. Impact of growth on economy's offer curve. So when you explain impact of growth on offer curve, just first paragraph explain what is offer curve. So offer curve explain relationship between what? Any offer curve represent what? How much
you have to import for given export.
For given export at different price ratio. So it basically shows how much quantity economy is willing to offer, that is sell, that is export. How much quantity a economy is willing to offer to buy a specific quantity of import at different relative prices. So when you explain offer curve, then you write export of good on horizontal axis and import of good on vertical axis. and offer curve bends backward. So if it is drawn for home country, for foreign country this will become import and this will become export, and therefore for foreign country the shape will be opposite. So in first paragraph just mention what do you understand by that offer curve, and terms of trade is determined by their intersection. वर्ड लिख लो भाई, and slope of that line is TOT. TOT is slope of this line. Now we have to explain the impact of growth. Impact of growth. So how to explain that impact of growth? Again, if you want to score more, divide growth into two parts. What could be the nature of growth? The nature of growth could be export bias or it could be import bias. If it is export bias, then one by one. If it is export bias, then what will be the impact in price of export? It will fall. As price of export will fall, it means you will have to export more quantity to buy same quantity of import, because price of export has reduced. So how it will affect the offer curve? If I mark simply a particular point here, let us say original एक point here है. So this point basically shows what? This much quantity economy is willing to export for this much of import at a certain price ratio. So if there is export bias growth, then due to more production of that good, price of that good will reduce. So price of export good will fall, and therefore you have to export more quantity to have same quantity of import. So the point will be to the right of it now. You have to export more to have same quantity of import. So this offer curve shifts outward. Simple सा point यहाँ रखेंगे, offer curve will always shift in that direction, whether it will shift towards export axis or towards import axis. In the case of export bias growth it will be towards export axis. In the case of import bias growth it will be towards import axis. And once it will shift to the right, what is the effect on terms of trade? The terms of trade decreases. So export bias growth will always reduce the terms of trade, as explained in that standard trade model also. So in the case of export bias growth, this diagram or growth may be import biased. But what will be the diagram in the case of import bias growth? In the case of that import bias growth, if you have drawn this offer curve for home country and foreign country and then determine this terms of trade, but now growth is in the import sector, so how it is affected? बताइएगा growth अगर home country में हो रहा है. If it is in the import industry, then production of imported good will increase. Price of imported good will, whenever you produce more of a commodity, due to more production, price will fall. So price of which good will fall? Price of imported good will fall. So when price of imported good will fall, it means now you can import more for a given quantity of export. So for a given quantity of export, earlier whatever will be the import, now you can import more than that. So this offer curve shifts towards import axis, and as it shifts towards import axis, the terms of trade for a country increases. But whatever I am saying, that how it is shifting to the left or right, the common error जो आंसर शीट के अंदर दिख रहा है वो ये है, you remember the graph. तो जस्ट ये याद रह जाता है कि in the case of export bias it will shift to the right and TOT decreases, but just writing that much will not fetch you marks. You have to give a reason why it shifts to the right, why it shifts to the left. Give that a reason. That, and also explain what do you understand by when you say export bias growth is happening or import bias growth is happening. So you have to explain that aspect as well. Import biasness and export biasness. So in those questions, if you want to score 6 or 7 marks, तो obviously उससे ज़्यादा नंबर मिलते नहीं. तो 6 to 7, for 6 to 7 also you have to be perfect. For 6 to 7, otherwise it will be 5, 5.5, 4.5. इस तरीके के नंबर. 6 and 6.5 is basically, you can say, optimum. 60%, 60 to 70 at the maximum. So be specific, but you can be specific only when you learn those. याद होना चाहिए exactly definition of offer curve, what will be the impact, because for writing such question you have only just 6 to 7 minutes, hardly 7 to 8 minutes hai. You have no scope of thinking there. So if you have written it again and again, then it will take less time to write it more effectively. There are many questions on HO model as well as third A or B or C. This was basically, third question was on HO model. First is the prediction of factor price equalization as per HO theory of international trade is contingent on, that depends on, perfect international mobility of factor prediction. Factor price equalization as per HO model is contingent on perfect international mobility of factor. Discuss the authenticity of the statement. Is it contingent or dependent upon labor mobility? In the model, what we have assumed? In the model we have assumed that labor and capital are free to move within country, but they are not free to move between the country. Perfectly immobile between the economy, perfectly mobile within the economy. But despite that immobility of factor of production, factor prices get equalized because trade is happening. So the economy was not exporting labor, but economy was exactly exporting what? Goods produced with labor intensive technology. So indirectly there was mobility of labor, not directly. So HO model is a fact, or rather factor price equalization model is not contingent upon mobility of labor. It is not depending upon. That means factor prices equalization can occur even when labor is not moving from one country to the other country. When labor move from India to US, obviously you expect that wages will equalize. As labor will move to US, in wages will fall in US, in India wages will rise, so it will become equalized. वो तो logical है. But mobility of factor is not there, but despite that factor price get equalized. So mainly that aspect has to be explained. What is meant by factor abundance and how does it affect the shape of production possibility frontier of a nation? Although question is straight, but asked in paper, what is meant by factor abundance? Now if you are writing it, what do you mean by factor abundance for 5 marks? So you have to be very specific. So what is exactly factor abundance? In HO model, factor abundance has been defined in two ways. In HO model, factor abundance has been defined in 2 ways. When you say factor abundance, then you are taking labor capital ratio in home country and labor capital ratio in the foreign country, and if labor capital ratio in home country is more as compared to foreign country, then you say that on the basis of physical term on the basis of physical term, on the basis of physical term, home country is labor abundant. But factor abundance has also been explained in an alternate form. Factor price ratio. So when I say wage upon rent, wage is price of labor, rent is price of capital. Wage upon rent is less in home and more in foreign country. So what does that mean? The factor which is abundant must be cheaper. So if wage is cheaper, it means, if labor is cheaper, it means labor must be abundant. But this is definition on the basis of factor price. Here also we see that home country is labor abundant. Home country is labor abundant. So factor abundance has been explained in two terms. One, physical term, second, factor price term. In physical term, home country is labor abundant if, remember, don't just write equation and leave it. You have to write it in sentence. So how you will write it, this statement in sentence? Or just make a sentence in the sense, home country is labor abundant if the proportion of physical quantity of labor to capital in that country is more as compared to ratio of physical quantity of labor to capital available in the foreign country. So you have to write that sentence. Alternatively, home country is said to be labor abundant if wage relative to rental cost of labor in that home country is less as compared to wage upon rental cost of capital in the foreign country. Then it will become a meaningful paragraph, and then you can simply write these 2 points. And how factor abundance affect the production possibility frontier, PPF. So how factor abundance determine the production possibility frontier? Remember, production possibility frontier. So when you say here cloth and food, if we say cloth and food and labor to capital ratio is more than labor to capital ratio in foreign country. So what will be the shape of PPF in home country? In home country, which factor is more?
Labor.
And cloth is labor.
Yes.
So it will be shifted more towards cloth. Cloth का intercept ज़्यादा रहेगा, food का intercept कम लिया. And in the opposite case, labor capital ratio is less as compared to this. Then it will be more in the towards y-axis. So basically what happens in the HO model is that in the HO model, labor capital ratio in home and foreign country are different. Therefore we have different PPF. We have different relative supply curve. From PPF we derive relative supply curve. So since we have different PPF, so we have different relative supply curve in that model. So the shape of PPF, rather the position of PPF, depend upon the factor abundance. वो फैक्टर अबंडेंस का फंक्शन होता है. एग्जांपल के फॉर्म में आप कोई भी यूज करते हो, क्लॉथ के लिए, फूड के लिए लेबर इंटेंसिव है, कैपिटल इंटेंसिव है, वहाँ लिखते हैं. This third question was, does HO model withstand factor intensity reversal test? Does HO model withstand factor intensity reversal test? What is the meaning of factor intensity reversal? Factor intensity reversal means if labor is if a cloth is labor intensive in home country and if the same good becomes capital intensive in the another country, then factor intensity get reversed. So if that happens, then whether HO model will hold or not. If that happens, then HO model will hold or not.
Both are
If
exporting.
HO model assumes what? HO model has important assumptions, and out of those assumptions, an important assumption is that if we have to explain trade between home country and foreign country, which produces two goods, cloth and food. Foreign country also produces two products, cloth and food. If I say cloth is labor intensive, which means labor to capital ratio used in the production of cloth, ठीक है, ये यूनिट लेबर रिक्वायरमेंट के लिए आप इसको रेट कर सकते हो, यूनिट लेबर रिक्वायरमेंट है या यूनिट लेबर यूज्ड है. लेबर टू कैपिटल रेशियो यूज्ड इन द प्रोडक्शन ऑफ क्लॉथ एंड लेबर टू capital ratio used in the production of food. So if cloth is labor intensive, then labor to capital ratio used in the production of cloth is more. So what will be the relation in the foreign country? ALC upon AKC और यहाँ लिखा है ALF upon AKF. बताएंगे what will be the relation in foreign? If this is the relation in home country, what will be the relation in the foreign country? It must remain same in the model. Model say that factor intensity between these two goods are different, but it is same in both countries. And when you say factor intensity get reversed, then it means what? Model say that ये होना है, but factor intensity reversal में, if cloth is labor intensive in home country, then in foreign country it will become capital intensive. So in the foreign country inequality will change. But if factor intensity get reversed, so if factor intensity get reversed, then you can simply say that if home country is labor abundant and if home country is labor abundant and cloth is labor intensive, so after intensity reversal what will happen? Foreign country is capital abundant and cloth is capital intensive. So how trade will occur? Labor abundant country will specialize in labor intensive good, that is cloth. Capital abundant country will specialize in capital intensive good, which is again cloth. So both countries specialize in cloth only, but both countries can't export same product because this is based upon perfect competition. The cloth is not different. We are not explaining intra-industry trade. We have to explain the inter-industry trade. So factor intensity reversal will not satisfy the HO model. And that's what also the idea when you explain that Leontief paradox. Leontief used the data of US for the period 1945 to 1970, and he found that although US is capital abundant, its export is more labor intensive. US was capital abundant, but its export was more labor intensive. And why there was such case? There was such case because there was a confusion when you explain that HO model, it is based upon 2 by 2 by 2 model. So there are two factors only, labor and capital. But remember, all labor are not homogeneous. There will be categories within labor: semi-skilled labor, unskilled labor, skilled labor, scientific manpower. So what US was exporting was intensive in skilled labor. So is it refuting the HO model? US was exporter of labor intensive good, but which labor? Skilled labor, scientific manpower. So based upon skilled labor and scientific manpower, the ranking of US will be still high. So we can still say that US is skilled labor intensive or skilled labor abundant. So if US is skilled labor abundant and US is exporting skilled labor intensive good, then it is consistent with HO model, not contradicting that theory. So when you write answer, various aspect has to be clubbed into one part. This fourth में first question growth and development का इसको explain कर रहे हैं. ये these two यहाँ तक देख लें. This is based upon Ricardian model. So but just by looking at that example, just indicate whether trade is beneficial or not. When trade is generally beneficial? Trade is beneficial only when opportunity costs are different. Only then trade will occur. So how much is opportunity cost? Exactly what is opportunity cost here? For India and for US, it is weight per man hour given. It is not 6 hours. It is 6 kg of weight produced by 1 hour in 1 hour. So how much is opportunity cost? What will be opportunity cost in India? If you write here wheat and cloth, just consider that India is having 1 labor hour. So in that 1 labor hour, how many quantity of wheat could be produced? 6. So I mark here 6. And in that hour, how many unit of cloth? 4. If you connect that line, what is slope? 2 by 3. So 2 by 3 is opportunity cost of wheat. 2 by 3 is opportunity cost of wheat. And if you draw that diagram for UK, then it will be 3 year and 2 year. What is opportunity cost again? 2 by 3. So opportunity cost is same. So when opportunity cost is same, then trade is not beneficial. Remember, when both countries have same opportunity cost, then they may produce only one good, may produce both the goods. But if opportunity costs are different, then they will produce only one commodity. Then it will become complete specialization. And how to explain this type of question? Applying the HO model, show that while a country as a whole potentially gain from trade, the owner of a scarce factor are worse off. Country as a whole gain, but the owner of scarce factor are worse off. Which factor is scarce here now? If home country is labor abundant, what is scarce factor then? Capital is scarce in home country then. If I say foreign country is capital abundant, then labor will become scarce in the foreign country. So how HO model explain that there is overall gain from trade, but the owner of scarce factor are worse off. Owners of scarce country are worse off. This part can be explained by HO model description. Here, question number 4, C part. For such question, you can use this type of description. Relative supply Remember, I am drawing these two relative supply curve for two different countries, one for home, other for foreign. And why we have two different relative supply curve? Because we have two different countries having different endowment of resource, and from different PPF we have get different relative supply curve. But in HO model, preference is assumed to remain same. So relative demand is same. Relative demand is same. So if they are not trading with each other, what will be the situation? Without trade, in home country price is determined by 0.1. Without trade, in foreign country price is determined by 0.2. So before trade what is happening? PC upon PF in home country is less than PC by PF in the foreign country. Okay? So what will be the pattern of trade? Which country will export what?
Foreign country export cloth.
Home country will export what? Why food? Cloth. In foreign country prices are higher. So home country cloth producer will prefer to sell their cloth in the foreign country. So from home country there will be export of cloth. Home country export cloth to foreign country. Home country export cloth to foreign country. As home country will export cloth to foreign country, supply of cloth in home country will get reduced, and supply of cloth in foreign country will increase. So in foreign country price will start declining and home country price will start. So price increases in home country and reduces in the foreign country. Now just show for home country what will be the impact. In home country there was a given PPF. On that given PPF, in the absence of trade, price was determined, rather production was determined by slope of that line, which was tangent at that point. अब आप ये बताएंगे after trade what is happening? After trade PC by PF is increasing. So when PC by PF will increase, this line will get steeper. So new tangency will be to the right side. But as new tangency will be to the right side, which means what? Country now produces more. Country now produces more of cloth. But how to produce more cloth?
By technical labor.
By
Food production.
employing more labor. Therefore, wage relative to rent will rise. But if you say wage relative to rent rise in home country, so which factor is better off, relatively speaking? Which factor is better off?
Labor.
Labor is better off, and labor was the abundant factor here. And which factor is relatively worse off? Capital, which was the scarce factor. So trade is benefiting which factor? Abundant factor. Trade will benefit the abundant factor, and trade will make the scarce factor relatively worse off. Abundant factor are better off and scarce factor are worse off. That is an important conclusion of HO model also. HO model has basically two important conclusions. Once it says a country will have comparative advantage in that line of production which uses its abundant factor intensively. And second is this, it says that trade makes that factor better off with which country is abundantly endowed. So home country was abundantly endowed with labor, so labor is better off and capital owners are relatively worse off. So it has implications for distribution of income as well. There is one part also in the last question based on a specific factor model. Trade benefit the factor that is specific to the sector Trade benefit the factor that is specific to the export sector, but hurt the factor specific to the import competing sector with ambiguous effect on mobile factor. This question is for a specific factor model. Okay, it is for a specific factor model. So for a specific factor model, the specific factor model simply say that there are this 2 by 3 model. Trade between home country and foreign country producing two goods, cloth and food, by using 3 factor of production. By using 3 factor of production, and those 3 factor of production are labor, capital and land. And what is specific here? Specific is that cloth production is using labor and capital, and food production is using labor and land. So capital is specific to cloth, land is specific to food. वो specific है, it means it cannot move from one sector to other sector, but labor can move from one sector to the other sector. And factors are paid always according to their productivity. So if you draw any marginal productivity of labor, suppose if I draw MPL of labor for cloth, then if labor employed in cloth is this, then corresponding to that you determine the wage. So this will be the area of wage, and what will be the above area? ये क्या शो करेगा? Area below marginal product is total product, and total product get distributed between factor of production. So 2 factor of production used in cloth is what? Labor and, so labor will be paid wage, so that area is the wage, and the above area is return to capital. ये return to capital उस केस में. And if you draw it for food, then marginal productivity of labor in food, then this area will represent again the wage, and this area is return to land owner, and this area is return to capital owner. ठीक है, इस पॉइंट को सिर्फ याद रखना, ये रफ में यूज कर लेना, मतलब जैसे ये इमेज रिकॉल कर लेना. To explain that model, because labor is the only mobile factor, you use only labor diagram. This is the total labor available. In this direction cloth, in the opposite direction food. So this line is price of cloth multiplied by marginal product of labor in cloth, and this is for price of food multiplied by marginal productivity of labor in food. Their equality will determine the wage. So we have a certain wage rate. Remember, for labor wages must be same in both industries, because if labor wages are not same, then labor is mobile, it can move from one to another sector. Now what will be the effect of trade? Suppose we have to explain effect of trade on home country. So first of all, remember, due to trade in home country, PC by PF increases in home country. Now if PC by PF increases, if I say, to simplify the diagram, If I say that price of cloth increases but price of food remains same, then also the ratio will rise. So if I say price of cloth increases by 10%, so we will shift that diagram by 10%. Price of cloth multiplied by MPL. I am saying price of cloth rises by 10%. So this gap is 10%. At every point it will shift by 10%. But where is the actual wage? ध्यान से देखिए बताना. Actual wage कहाँ पे होगा? ये नहीं होना है. Actually यहाँ होना है. So if price rises by 10%, wage will not rise by 10%. Wage will rise by less than 10%. Wage will rise by less than 10%. Now, one more thing. Initial point of intersection was 1. Now it is point 2. So at point 2, more labor is used for the production of cloth and less labor is available for the production of food. So now determine certain points here. Marginal productivity of labor curve, MPL in cloth and MPL in food. Earlier there was a point. जब मैंने earlier का point mark किया है तो which point I am referring to? First point. There was a specific labor in both. In that case, this was the wage area, and the above area was returned to capital and returned to land. अब आप बताएंगे when you move from 1 to 2, labor employed in cloth increases. So labor employed in cloth increases, which means labor employed in food decreases. So if you increase here, then which area increases? Returns to which owner? Capital owner. And here returns to landowner get reduced. So if I say what is the effect in the home country, so you can make conclusion in this form. There are three important parts here. Capital owner better off or worse off? Capital owner का return ये. Capital owner better off, and capital was which factor? Specific to which industry? Capital was specific to cloth, and cloth is the export good. So statement is that factor which is specific to export sector will be better off, and landowner worse off. Point is what will be the effect on worker? Worker is the mobile factor. Now what is the effect on workers real wage? उसका wage क्या हो रहा है? बड़ा है. In both industry it will increase, but it will not increase by the same proportion of price. So for worker you will say that wage relative to price of cloth, and other is wage relative to price of food. One by one करके बताएंगे. Wage has increased but by less than 10%. Price of cloth was increasing by 10%. So this entire value, which means what? His real wage in terms of cloth has reduced. His real wage in terms of cloth has reduced. And what is W upon PF? Wage has gone up, but price of food is same. So his real wage in terms of food has increased. So whether worker is better off or worse off, we can't say. We can't say, because his real wage in terms of cloth has reduced, real wage in terms of food has increased, and therefore the effect on mobile factor is ambiguous. Effect on that mobile factor is ambiguous. So there is ambiguity for the mobile factor, no ambiguity for the specific factor. ठीक है. Now you can read this question again. Trade benefit the factor that is specific to the export sector of each country, but hurt the factor specific to the import competing sector with ambiguous effect on the mobile factor. So that question basically require description of this complete part. Mainly this. And the problem. Now few questions from growth and development. Mainly the questions are on Solow model. First E question is में explain how according to Solow model technical progress is the source of sustained increase in output per worker. In the first question E part, technical progress is the source of sustained increase in output per worker. When you say output, that is Y, it is a function of labor and capital. It is generally written in the form of A capital to the power alpha labor to the power 1 minus alpha. When you include technology, technology is represented by A. So output is a function of technology, it is a function of capital, it is a function of labor. When you say include technical progress, so after technical progress you write that Y as a function of labor multiplied by efficiency, comma capital. So we are assuming that technical progress increases efficiency of labor and not efficiency of machine. Change is such that it increases efficiency of the worker and not efficiency of machine or capital. If you divide it by labor into E, then it will become here 1. This is capital upon L into E. This Y upon L into E is called output per effective worker, which is a function of capital per effective worker. One constant I ignored there. When you explain it the steady state model, then what is the steady state condition here? For a steady state, what is required? Investment must be equal to break-even investment. And what is the break-even investment? It is that investment which is needed to keep stock of capital per worker constant. So at any given point of time you have a specific capital K by L into E. You have to keep it constant. Remember, this K is changing because of 3 factors. This stock of capital may depreciate, labor force may increase, technical progress may increase. So all those factors are included here. Delta plus N plus G into K किया, डेल्टा डेप्रिसिएशन रेट लिया है, N पॉपुलेशन ग्रोथ लिया है और G टेक्निकल प्रोग्रेस रेट लिया है. ये 3 फैक्टर लिए वहाँ. And then you equate it with the saving as a function of income, and that determines the steady state value. यहाँ से इकोनॉमी का steady state determine है. After determining that steady state, now which variables are steady there at that point? कौन कौन से variables steady हैं? Steady का मतलब in all period it will remain सेम 2017, 18, 19, 20 हर पीरियड में वैल्यू कांस्टेंट है. So which values are constant there? At steady state which values are fixed? Steady state पे कौन कौन सी वैल्यू यहाँ कांस्टेंट है? This is steady state stock of capital. So stock of capital at steady state is constant. याद है नहीं? At steady state there is no change in capital per effective worker. वो zero है. Which means the term which is constant is K hat. But K hat is capital K upon L into E. ये complete term constant है. ठीक है? So when this ratio can be constant? Ratio constant है, it means growth of denominator and growth of numerator must be same. So what is the growth of denominator? Labor is growing at what rate? N. Efficiency is growing at what rate? G. So labor into E is growing at a rate of N plus G. When you take growth rate it becomes log. Log ले जाता है. जहाँ प्रोडक्ट आएगा वहाँ साइन प्लस आ जाएगा, जहाँ रेशियो आएगा वहाँ साइन माइनस आ जाएगा. So if I say capital stock is growing, then remember it is growing at what rate? This K is growing at what rate? Growth of L plus growth of E. So N plus G. ठीक है? Similarly, what is the effect on Y? Because Y is a function of K. This Y hat is capital Y upon L into E. So capital Y is growing at what rate? ये पूरा टर्म कांस्टेंट है. कैपिटल वाई इज जीडीपी. जीडीपी इज ग्रोइंग एट व्हाट रेट? जीडीपी इज ग्रोइंग एट अ रेट ऑफ n plus g. नाउ टेल मी हियर, व्हेन यू से जीडीपी पर कैपिटा, हाउ यू कैलकुलेट जीडीपी पर कैपिटा ऑफ इकोनॉमी? बाय डिवाइडिंग जीडीपी विथ पॉपुलेशन. सिंपल, फिजिकल लेबर फोर्स से डिवाइड कर देंगे. पॉपुलेशन मतलब तो वैल्यू हुआ. So can it be written as small y upon e? ये small y मैंने यूज कर लिया for y upon l के लिए. y upon l is small y upon e, and now I am saying that this y upon a is constant. So if y upon e is constant, it means y is growing at what rate? ये रेशियो फिक्स है, तो y का ग्रोथ किस रेट से होगा? जिस रेट से टेक्निकल प्रोग्रेस हो रहा है. So although economy is at a steady state, but every year GDP per capita is increasing at what rate? Technical progress होते हैं. So if every year GDP per capita increases by let us say 2%. So every year per person income of economy increases by 2%, and when per person income of economy increases, it makes sustained growth. It improves the standard of living. If GDP double, population also double. GDP per capita remains same. Standard of living does not change. So there will be sustained growth at steady state only because of technical progress. But what determines technical progress not explained in the model. So you have to limit your answer there. In the same part here, there was a question in the last year, 17 May. What is solo residual? So what is exactly solo residual and what is its implication? Solo residual. What is solo residual here? Solo residual is here. When you explain that solo residual, remember y is a function of labor and capital, generally written in the form of a capital to the power alpha, labor to the power 1 minus alpha. So output is a function of a, k and l. So output growth will depend upon growth of A, growth of K, and growth of L. So output growth is delta y upon y, which is equal to, ये growth rate के ले लीजिए. Since while explaining growth rate, it will be log will be taken, so sin plus आता जाएगा. Growth rate of technology delta A by A plus पावर से यहाँ मल्टीप्लाई करके लिखेगा डेल्टा K by K प्लस पावर से मल्टीप्लाई करके डेल्टा L by L. So this is your output growth, which is equal to technical growth plus contribution of capital. Contribution of capital in what? In output growth. And this is contribution of labor. Out of these different variables, which variables can be physically calculated? Which variables are you can see and you can calculate it? Output is something which can be measured. Capital, physical capital hai, you can see, you can calculate it. Labor, you can measure it. But what about technology? We can't see technology. It is not available in that physical form. So this technical progress growth is referred as the residual. If I say in the economy capital accumulation occurs at the rate of 10%, labor force increases at the rate of 5%. So ideally the growth rate of the economy should be just 15%. But if it is 20%, then how come the additional 5% comes? Additional 5% is coming because of technology. In that way वो residual है. So if you have to calculate the solo residual is nothing but technical progress. And how to calculate it? From output growth subtract what? Capital contribution and labor contribution. Capital and labor contribution. And obviously what is the implication of that solo residual? Past question में भी use किया आपने. What is the significance of this? Technical progress explain the sustained growth. This explains the sustained growth. Unless there will be no technical progress, there will be no sustained growth in the economy. So there will be sustained growth in the economy only because of that technical progress. So the question was not different, but last year के लिए वो आप कह सकते हैं it was for some students, those who do not were able to relate it. For them it was a new topic. Solo residual, but it is nothing but growth accounting equation. Part in this solo model is 4a. The frequency of this question is again very high. From last 3-4 years, it says describe the growth path. Describe the growth path which once economy attain it will give it a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all the time. Describe the growth path which once attained gives a higher level of per capita consumption than any other growth path for all the time. मतलब उस पॉइंट पे पर कैपिटा कंजम्पशन की जो वैल्यू होगी वो हायर होगी एज कंपेयर टू एनी अदर ग्रोथ पाथ. सो दिस इज बेसिकली रेफरिंग टू द गोल्डन रूल स्टेडी स्टेट. At a steady state, economy is steady, but at that point consumption per worker may be highest, may not be highest. But what is the golden rule steady state? Golden rule steady state is that state where consumption per worker is highest. So it is basically representing maximization of well-being, maximization of welfare. So it is 4a is nothing but the golden rule steady state. So what to explain that golden rule? Golden rule steady state. So first of all, explain what do you mean by golden steady state. It is that state where per capita consumption get maximized. So since you write equation in terms of per capita, so it is C plus I. So C can be calculated as Y minus I. Since it is steady state, so star, and Y is a function of K. And for a steady state, investment must be equal to depreciation. So this is the consumption at a steady state, and you have to maximize it. So what you will do? Mathematically क्या करेंगे? करना नहीं है कहीं, but just if you have to maximize it, you differentiate it and equate it to 0. But when you differentiate the function, you will get marginal productivity of capital. When you differentiate this term, it will be only delta and equated to 0, which means marginal productivity of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Just remember that line. Move on later. Golden rule is that level where marginal productivity of capital is equal to depreciation rate. Okay? And then explain it graphically. Draw that depreciation line. Production function line. Y as a function of K. The gap has to be maximized first, because Y minus I is consumption and you have to maximize that. So this must be the stock of capital where consumption per worker will be maximized. But in order to be steady state, from that point only you can draw saving line. You can't draw saving line from any other point, because the moment you will take at any other point, the steady state will be different, and it will not be that steady state where consumption per worker is highest. So from this what follows? It simply means that for any different steady state, remember a rough diagram of drawing, when you draw this depreciation line, if you take any saving rate, this will become steady state. If you take a higher saving rate, this will become steady state. If you take different steady state, this will be the steady state. So there can be many steady state, but there will be only one golden rule steady state. To have one golden rule steady state, we require a specific saving rate. So we require a specific saving rate to have a specific golden rule steady state. So for golden rule you will draw only once, एक ही line में. But saving rate may be more than that, may be less than that. So in some subsequent test as well, you will get other question which is related to that. Golden rules relate to all. But in this question this was required. But when you say steady, what does it mean then? Steady actually means that for all the time path, the value of consumption, the value of investment, and the value of output remains steady, and it will continue to move at the same level. Investment value, consumption value, output value, steady in that sense. It is steady in that way. Some brief idea बाकी मॉडल के लिए मैं एक्सप्लेन कर दे रहा हूँ. Like when you explain Lewis model, although next test में property आना चाहिए था, but still when you explain that Lewis model, first explain the idea of dualism, which means coexistence of two sectors. One is traditional sector and other is modern sector, that is agriculture and industry. Labor will move from traditional to modern. First of all, surplus labor will move, then disguised unemployment labor will move, and then slowly agriculture will become commercialized. So why labor move from traditional to modern? Because of higher wage in the modern. Why wages are less in traditional? Because more labor is available in traditional sector, which reduces the productivity and wage. And then you can explain the description by considering that wages are constant. At constant wage there is a given demand for labor. This area is the profit of capitalist, which is reinvested, so labor demand shifts to the right. Again profit increases, but now labor employment also increases. So more and more labor is being employed in the modern sector, but it does not mean that it is infinity till it will be horizontal till infinity. When more and more labor has been withdrawn, the wage will start rising, which will reduce the profitability of capitalist and thereby slow down the process of capital accumulation. And as a result, the process of growth will also stop. So economy will attain a stationary state. And there will be some drawback also, as if you say that profit has been reinvested, but suppose profit has been reinvested in labor saving technology, then it is possible that it shifts in such a manner. Then employment of labor remains same. Only profit of capitalists will increase with no change in the labor employment. Jobless growth. तो ये क्वेश्चन तो ट्रेडिशनल क्वेश्चन है, कन्वेंशनल है, सबका आंसर रेडी होना चाहिए. सिमिलरली व्हेन यू एक्सप्लेन बैलेंस ग्रोथ पाथ, अनबैलेंस ग्रोथ, these are in fact fixed variation in सब क्वेश्चन में बहुत कम है. So the idea of balanced growth strategy, the idea of unbalanced growth strategy, there was one question in the form of a country is poor because it is poor, imply that a circular constellation of forced them to act and react upon one another in such a way to keep the poor country in a statement. That keep a poor country in a state. A country is poor because it is poor. Basically, this statement was given by Knox, and Knox basically explained that in order to have growth, you must break this vicious cycle. So you have to break that vicious cycle. This vicious cycle is operating on supply side, and vicious cycle is also operating on the demand side. The supply side say that due to low per capita income, when per capita income is low in a country, then most of the income is spent on consumption. So that will result into low level of saving. Due to low level of saving, it will be translated into low level of investment. With low investment, it will keep productivity of worker low. And as we know, productivity determines income, so income will remain low. So in that way, circular fact causation. And on the demand side, it says that when per capita income is low, what is the size of market? Small size. Now, small size of market means there is low inducement to invest. There is low inducement to invest. With low inducement to invest, actually there will be low investment. With low investment, again there will be low productivity, and with low productivity there will be lower income. So Knox basically say that a country is poor because to begin with that country was poor. So being poor is the biggest reason for remaining poor as well. But who can break that cycle? How the cycle can be broken? If country is having low saving, can we invest more? Yes, we can invest more by borrowing, by allowing foreign direct investment, by deficit financing by government. There are many other ways to invest. So government can break that cycle. Therefore government intervention is required, foreign investment is required, because the domestic capacity to save is less. So you have to supplement it from the other sources. You have to supplement it from the other factors. Done. So mostly question we have discussed. Some questions which I will be covering in the next test, because that question will be repeated. Most of the question, in fact all question from international trade has been explained. One or two question for growth and development is left, like endogenous part, and that can be taken in the next part. Test number 4 was for Indian economy, test number 5 में होगा remaining वाली part. So the same question will be repeated. But what is required for this improvement is your answer has to be more specific. So try to learn first 1 or 2 paragraph at least, with which you can start. How to start, how much you will write, that all depends upon the statement of the question. But give some idea like offer curve. So you must explain what is exactly offer curve in that one line. That sentence must be accurate. Then if there is a growth, what is the meaning of growth? What is the meaning of export bias growth? What is the meaning of import bias growth? Be specific. And then neatly draw the diagram and then explain. So the answer presentation part has to be worked on, as well as the graphical description. So hardly when you explain that part, ना तो बहुत ज़्यादा खुला लिखना है, मतलब in one page I hope around 100 words at least होने चाहिए on one side. 1.5 side basically आपको लिखना है, और one don't draw diagram, big diagram, proportionate होना चाहिए. मतलब इससे ज़्यादा बड़ा diagram अपने पेज पे अगर आप यूज़ कर रहे हैं, तो इस पेज पे अगर आप यूज़ कर रहे हैं तो don't draw a diagram bigger than this. इससे ज़्यादा बड़ा diagram बनाने की जरूरत नहीं है. And no need to explain those denotations. What does this imply? वो चलता है, ठीक है. तो you only then you can save time to write the content. Otherwise content will get compromised. ठीक है. तो आपको वो content, जैसे आपने function लिखा कोई, if you write a production function, y is a function of capital and labor, and after that you write a capital to the power alpha, labor to the power 1 minus alpha. Now no need to write y is output. At this level it is understood. K is capital, L is labor. No need to write where K is capital, Y is output, L is labor force. ठीक है. So you can save some time. So we will continue with this. Test number 5 पहले आ जाएगा, फिर test number 2 उसके बाद होगा. मतलब for next discussion it will be first test number 5. After that test number 4 का discussion. Paper 2.